Do you know where the U.S. ranks with other countries when it comes to literacy rates and why this ranking is important? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Literacy was once defined as the ability to read a simple sentence. This is a definition that is still accepted in many countries. But in the U.S., the definition of literacy is a little more complicated, since literacy is now defined by some as having the ability to use printed and written information to develop one's knowledge and potential. The National Institute for Literacy estimates that 32 million American adults are unable to read, which can contribute to chronic unemployment, low self-esteem, and a decreased ability to get better paying employment. In relation to other countries, the U.S. has a literacy rate of 80% and is number 125 on a list of 197 countries. On this show, I'll speak with 3 guests. 2 are in the studio with me, and 1 guest is joining us by phone. To my left is Alona Murley. Ms. Murley has over 20 years' experience working with families, individuals, and organizations to resolve difficulties relating to language, reading, and communication. She has an MA in education and a California teaching credential. Ms. Murley was a classroom teacher for 10 years and a child advocate representing families with children with disabilities. She was a clinic director for a private reading company and has been in private practice for 11 years. Seated to my right is Azalia Renfield, who is the former founder and executive director and a current board member for the United Educators Association for Affordable Housing, Inc. She is responsible for the strategic direction of the organization and oversees all areas of the company, including policy, grant development, programs, services, and partnerships. Ms. Renfield has a master's degree in public administration from the University of San Francisco and a master's in human resource management from Golden Gate University. Dr. Carla Prince-Chang is joining us by phone. Dr. Prince-Chang has over 20 years of teaching experience in non-traditional, international, and Montessori settings. She has worked in many different arenas with children and adults. She is an adjunct professor at California State University, a co-executive director of United Educators for Housing and Literacy, and the CEO of the Mixed Methods Consulting Firm. Thank you so much for joining me. It's a delight to have the 3 of you with me, although we can't right now see Carla. So I gave some dreary statistics when it comes to how the U.S. ranks with other countries. Very low on a list of 197. Can you tell me why you think this is the case and the U.S. ranks so low? Carlo, you can join us at any time.
Why? Well, first I'll say it's complicated, not a one answer. I would say the United States is enormous, an enormous country compared to European countries, or Finland consistently ranks #1 in education. So I think there's a great deal of diversity in this country, economically, socially. So I think that that's a big contributor, and I think that it's a very American thing to want all levels of society to become educated. So we don't have a lot of limits. Second to that, I would say that it's hard to, you have to look at the testing that's done and these measures, how they're done. So I think it's several components.
Okay, great. Azalia, what do you think?
You know, I, I second Ilona's sentiment. I just believe that there are so many things that contribute to it, the literacy being the way it is, that is so complex. It's really a systemic issue that goes deeper than just surface level. Um, I can't even begin to sit in a set and even say why, but I'm hoping that we can break into some of the reasons why.
Carla, do you have any ideas on why the U.S. might rank so low when it comes to literacy levels?
Well, I think we're going to touch on that when we speak about how literacy is taught and our educators also being taught how to teach literacy. I think that because we don't have a universal system, that might be part of it, among other factors, which we mentioned earlier, socioeconomic, et cetera. So, yeah, we're excited to talk about it today.
So do you think literacy levels are improving? Or are we getting worse?
They're not improving. 2019 scores just came out, and we're not improving. We're declining. As a matter of fact, I can't remember what newspaper it was, either the Journal or the LA Times possibly reported that Mississippi was the only state in the United States that had made gains.
Well, Mississippi was so low. I mean, it has
Exactly.
always been the last one.
Exactly.
It's hard for it to have gotten worse.
Exactly. And it comes to mind also that, just back to the last question we were talking about, is that the United States doesn't have a lot of other opportunities. We don't have a lot of trade schools. We don't, in Europe, for example, in Germany and other countries, the children are immediately after 4th grade, 6th grade, the breaking points are different. They're kind of sectioned off to if they want to go to trade school, if they want to go.
But I'm thinking the fact that there's trade school, does that mean the literacy level can stay low because you're going to trade school?
Well, maybe it doesn't manifest in the same way, I'm thinking. And they don't maybe send so many kids, so many kids, our whole population, it goes to school. Education here is mandatory for everyone through high school.
So you're saying maybe the literacy rates that are shown for other countries might not accurately reflect the literacy rates in those countries.
Possibly. And those countries tend to show very similar trends years after the United States. So now there's more immigration, there's more, you know, I'd say diversity than, for example, 10, 20 years ago in other countries. And here that's been the case for a long time. So things that I saw my teacher friends in Europe dealing with, now they saw us dealing with 20 years ago.
No, but what might that have been? Might that have been what? Immigration, the results of immigration? Diversity? Azalea, what do you think?
I mean, it's hard to really speculate, but I think that when you think about trade schools, you know, you're really going there for a trade, and it's more of a hands-on approach. I don't think there's much given to really to read this manual and understand every step by step.
Well, it seems to me if you're in trade school, maybe you should be able to read the manual because you might be working with machinery and somebody's life might be on the line.
But again, it's that show me as opposed to read it on your own. When you think about trade school, I mean, just think about construction field as a whole. You go there and you learn how to hit a hammer a certain way. There could be, there's surely, I'm not negating the fact that there's not an element of reading there. And even still then, it's about like, hey, show me how to do this. How did you do this? As opposed to like, you read it and figure it out yourself. It's a different type of discipline. And I will be interested to see what those numbers look like, particularly as it relates to literacy in trade schools. That might be another assessment that needs to happen.
So Carla, we got off on trade schools. I don't know how well you're hearing us, and it seems to me it's almost like saying the expectations for literacy can be lower.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that every field, every career has their standards and they have their requirements. And whatever those are the students need to meet. So obviously, if you're going into engineering, there's going to be a high STEM training. If you're going into anything hands-on or in trade schools, your focus is going to be, can you actually produce a product, a physical product? And then if you're going into education, you're going to be doing more reading and testing, et cetera. So it really does depend on each career area, and I wouldn't say that literacy is not important at all in all of those areas, because it is. It just matters, or what matters is the emphasis placed on literacy in each of those areas. That's what I would answer that.
Sure. I can remember, and I don't want to date myself, but I do remember when the Russians launched Sputnik. This whole country was taken by surprise, and it was asked why Johnny can't read. And that was in the 1960s. And so we're still at that point. It seems quite sad, still thinking why Johnny can't read.
Absolutely, and to your point about self-esteem in the beginning you mentioned, literacy goes so far beyond academics, and that is, for us, I think for the three of us, even coming from the housing aspect, from Carla doing, you know, university level and early childhood education, I think it's so important because it is to us an equalizer, so to speak, or it has to do with equality and equity. For me personally, I came out of an entire socioeconomic class because I became educated. And growing up, there was not a book in my house, I don't think. Yeah, I could say that. We didn't read. My father went to the 8th grade. My mother finished high school. My parents were immigrants, and I'm still the only person to have gone to school. And my opportunities are so much greater. My social opportunities are so much greater. So it is in this country, we're a reading society. And
you would think.
Yes.
You would think, right?
Yes, or rather, our society is built around literacy. And if you're not reading, which so many of our children are not, 50% of them, you are on the edge of...
Wait a moment. You said 50% of our children aren't reading?
Are reading not at grade level, are reading below a third grade level. Nationally. Primarily
in low-income communities, not in, you don't find this in affluent communities.
I don't think that's true. I haven't looked at the exact breakdown from city to city. It's a national average, and so I'm sure some communities are more affluent than others, but from my experience in the Bay Area, schools that I consult with, private schools that cost many thousands of dollars a year, and in less affluent neighborhoods, they are all experiencing a problem. However, money enables a lot of kids to get tutoring. Tutoring is a multi-million-dollar industry, and kids are booked from morning to night doing tutoring activities to boost their opportunities and their chances.
And to that point, let's not forget that literacy is not something that's championed in a way of saying, hey, I have a problem, I can't read. And this is not just for kids, but this is also for adults. No one's going to say, hey, I don't know how to read. It's something that's shunned upon. It's something that people don't feel comfortable acknowledging that. My grandmother didn't know how to read, but she made it somehow. And I was shocked to hear that revelation, but that was her truth.
How old is your grandmother
Well, she passed. She was 74. And she worked in Montgomery wards. And when they shut down in Daly City, they shut down. She worked in the linen department. But she didn't know how to read. And to me,
it's
I'm
amazing.
shocked.
Like, how did she fill out the job application? Or maybe there wasn't a job application. Or maybe she took it home and someone else filled it out.
But that's my question. Is that so? I would look at her like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You're ringing up a teller. You're at the, you're working a cashier. How are you getting by? So my question is, if my grandmother was able to do that, and she was, she was 74, God rest her soul. Think about all the millions of other people behind her who are just mimicking or just giving the society what they think we want, and just faking their way. Some people are very clever, and you may not really necessarily know how to, you find ways on how to get through. That's for anybody. You adapt and you overcome. And that's essentially what's happened on when no one wants to own that they can't read.
Well, it seems to me if you're a child in school, you can say, I don't understand this, I can't read this. But it makes me wonder, and Carla, you might want to say something about this. How is it that so many kids are being passed on to the next grade if they can't read, if they're not at reading level?
You know, Carla, you want to say something on that?
Apologies for interrupting. The sound is choppy. I can't hear. Sorry.
Well, until the sound clears up, I had been asking how it is that so many children can be passed on from grade to grade if they can't read. Can you hear it? Did you hear that? Well, Azalea.
Yeah, I still can't hear. I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
While the sound gets better, I'll let Azalea hear comment. And Carla, let us know when you can hear better.
Well, how do kids get passed on? You know, that's a good question. I would submit that I think that, you know, it's tricky. And I think that, you know, everyone wants the best intention. We hope for kids to get through. And there are very real things that go on with matriculation. There's very real things that goes on with making sure that you're serving and getting the job done. And there are very real things when parents go home and see their kids and say, what are you doing? There's accountability in different ways, and everyone's kind of just passing the buck. And so I would submit that, you know, there's a multitude of reasons. And, you know, quotas, because it's the best thing to do. Money, tutoring, and with the hope of saying, okay, my child may not be doing good now, but he'll catch up in 3rd grade. He may know he's struggling a little bit, but he'll catch up in 4th grade. It's just like, I'm going to catch up, I'm going to catch up, I'm going to catch up, and then before you know it, it's too late. And then you're sitting there with a kid in high school, I taught high school, who are dealing with these issues in high school level because it never stopped and never was addressed early on. So that becomes a very...
But that kid is in a class where, what type of work might that kid be performing in terms of his classmates?
Possibly terrible work, and the teacher is told to pass that child on.
And the other kids, but we said 50% of the kids. So of that classroom, he probably, or he or she isn't probably the only one in that classroom.
No, and the kids are getting passed on. I'm sorry to say this, but it's a numbers game. And the schools are funded per child, and the schools do not want to hold kids back.
So you're talking about educators who are not doing their job. So Carla, can you let me know when you can hear us?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So can you comment? I mean, would you like to comment on why it is kids are getting passed on when they can't read? And why educators seem to be failing at what they're supposed to be doing, teaching?
That's very interesting. There's a lot of play with that one because it really does depend on who makes that decision. Because we know teachers are, you know, quote unquote boots on the ground, and they're not necessarily making those executive decisions to say, this child needs to stay or go in my class. I think that's a decision by whoever's above the teachers. So I don't want to say principal, attendance, whoever. The fact of the matter is that it's happening. We know it's happening because all you have to do is look at the numbers, right? So if you see there's 50% of the students not reading at grade level by 3rd grade, then there is a gap. There is a need that is not being filled. So if whoever gives the authority to say, let's pass these children on, we need to go to the next, we don't have enough space, whatever the reason is, it is a failure on all of our parts.
On all of our parts? I would think the major responsibility has to be on the part of the individual teacher who is not effectively...
Did you hear me? I can't hear you now.
Well.
Yeah, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's true. I think that teachers are out there really, I mean, that's what I see, working hard, really working hard and exhausted. It could definitely, I think, an aspect of it, that teacher training is not where it needs to be for literacy, for reading.
So are you saying the teachers don't know how to teach reading?
I think that that happens, not because they don't want to. I think the training in reading, there's still a lot of conflict about how to teach reading. People disagree on how to teach reading. There is also a disconnect between science and the educators, the people on the ground, and somehow that information is not...
So you say the teachers might be exhausted, they're working so hard. What are they working hard at if they're not capable of teaching reading, which is something that's very basic? I mean, how do you get your teaching degree, your teaching credentials?
Right, I totally get that.
If you can't teach reading.
Well, I have teaching credentials, and I never learned how to teach reading in my credentialing program. So, and many teachers don't. We're taught how to maybe look for, how to test for reading levels, and maybe we're taught a piece or a part of
But
reading.
wait a moment, I'm so sorry. That doesn't make sense to me. That a teacher might be taught how to test for reading levels and not taught how to teach. I mean, my mother taught me how to read, and my mother didn't have a teaching credential. I mean, you teach a child its ABCs, you teach them how to spot what's
Okay.
an ABC,
Well, let
you
me-
teach them basic
first of
words
all, let me
like
say-
cat and rat. It doesn't seem that complicated.
It's
or
very,
is it,
it's
or
very
is it something
complicated.
I'm overlooking?
It's
There's
very
elements to
complicated.
it. There's comprehension, right? So
Yes,
there's different
yes.
things. It's a three, give it a 3 box.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So it's complicated, it's not easy. 40% of the population, and not exact numbers, between 40 and 50% of the population will learn how to read. If you put that child in a corner with a paper bag, they're going to learn how to read.
You mean a paper bag over their head? Or
Yeah,
a
that was an expression to basically teach sight word, teach phonics, teach whole language, teach. That child is wired and is probably going to pick it up.
So you're saying the majority of children aren't so wired?
That's right. Reading, the brain is not, the reading part of the brain does not really exist in and of itself. Evolutionarily speaking, there's not a part of the brain specifically designated to reading. And so the brain pulls from the auditory, from the visual, from different parts of the brain. And over half of us probably are not wired to read. We have to actually be wired for the reading process. And so it is very complicated. And for years, we've been fighting about how to do it. It was the sight word people who said, oh, it's sight words, it's visual. Dick and Jane, I don't know how you learned to read. Then there was the whole language
You
camp.
mean Dick and Jane ran up the hill
Yeah,
and one of them fell
to catch
down?
a pail of water.
Was that Dick and Jane or Jane? I know it was Jane.
Yeah.
Carla, do you hear us?
Yes.
Oh, good. You're laughing. So so what
Yeah.
would you say? Our brains have to be wired. So were our brains wired, or somebody wired them?
Yeah, well, if you easily learned to read, you probably picked up on however your mom did it with you.
Before I went to kindergarten,
Yeah, absolutely.
and I was passed on to first grade.
That happened.
Like my son.
Yes.
So we had wired brains. Carla, you're an adjunct professor. Did you have a wired brain?
Well, no, I'm not sure. Well, I have self-disclosure. I have dyslexia.
Oh, do you really?
Everything was harder for me, but I had help at home and at school. And I absolutely love to read. I still love reading. So I think I personally might have been pre-wired, even though I flipped letters, flipped numbers, that thing. But it was the love of reading that kept me going, and personally. And I know there's a lot of students that have dyslexia or dyspraxia, whatever they have, but I think we all know not only the teaching part in school affects you, your environment as well affects you. So if you have help, if you have someone who is instructing you and helping you and teaching you, in addition to the school, you obviously will fare better.
So your learning disability was picked up early.
No, not really. I didn't. It wasn't something that was tested back when I was in school. Not that I was in school so long ago, but everyone just pushed through. Today, everyone's getting tested for ADHD or dyslexia or whatever. I don't recall being tested in elementary school. I think I found out in undergrad and college.
In college?
And I'm like, oh, this makes sense. That's why I was doing this, that, and the other.
In college?
So, yeah.
So how did you do through public school? You evidently did well before just the fact that you got to college. Was it a struggle?
Yeah, it was. It was. And like I said, I had a lot of help at home because my parents were able to help me. Peers were able to help me, and my teachers were able to help, right?
But they didn't. But they didn't know what
But I
was.
don't think learning how to read was an issue because I think I was reading before we went to school. So that was a big foundation for me.
That's amazing.
Math, so we can talk about that. But reading was easy for me.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Congratulations. So if it comes down to wiring the brain, and what you're saying is, it's a
I
matter.
lost you again.
Well, let us know when you pick us up. If it's a matter of reading readiness, you know, there was Head Start that was supposed to prepare young children before they even went to kindergarten.
I can't hear you guys.
Okay, we're sorry. Somebody in the studio, in the control room, please help Carla. So in the
Now I can
meantime,
hear you. I can hear you now.
okay,
Yeah.
great.
Those programs are great, and Carla also can speak to that. But I think those programs are very helpful, and they were also specifically popularized by Jeffrey Canada in New York. You know, did Harlem Children's Zone.
Yep.
And
But this was even before Harlem Children's Zone.
Head Start was before that.
Yes,
But now also
yes.
a lot are modeling after that with the diapers and having parent education. And so it's all very helpful. And everything we do to support that is fantastic. Having a rich language environment, having children read with their parents or follow along is helpful. But it's still not it's not the same as teaching reading. So now those kids are going to school prepared. They are going to school prepared. They are aware of what health measures
You're
to
talking
take.
about
and
those in the Harlem Children's Zone.
well, not just those, any Head Start, First Five, any of the
okay,
early childhood
so
programs.
these early childhood programs
Yeah.
are functioning properly and showing good results.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And then the kids still need to learn to read when they come into first grade or kindergarten. So they're prepared, they have the social, emotional wherewithal, they have the extra support at home, they have the health, they have the checkups, they have what we a lot of times were missing when kids came to school.
You mean you need all of that before you learn to read?
It's been proven to work. I mean,
That's
Head Start really does help. I mean, if you think about it, if your kid was born before a certain date or later than a certain date, you have to wait a whole year and you get delayed for kindergarten. So what do you do with that bunch of kids? And you got to hope that they just catch up, and then all of a sudden they start falling behind, or maybe not. It's just like almost like a gamble. So even for that alone is problematic because you're just like holding these kids that might actually need that Head Start to hit the ground running. I mean, that's why we're all about pre-K, because I mean I mean, we already know that kids can learn language faster than anyone. They learn fast, they pick up a lot of information, which is why that's the age where it's really imperative to get
Whether
the help
they're
they need.
reading or not, they can still pick up different words in different languages.
Even with sound and pronunciations, when they hear different languages, they hear the lisps, the way everything's just magnified. They hear everything so much more clearer.
So let's talk about you, Carla. All three of you are working together in a special program. So let's talk about how you became involved. Can you hear us now, Carla?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's start with you. Well, you just finished talking, so. Carla, let's talk with you while you can hear us. And we can hear you on how you became involved. How did the three of you start working together on a special reading program?
Well, we all have our pre-history, so prior to meeting, right, dealing with history. My experience early in an underprivileged neighborhood, working with young kids that were 5 and 6 years old, and realizing they weren't able to read and write at that age. And I remember, like I said, I had the pre-K access myself, and I was able to read and write going into kindergarten. So I noticed the gap right there, and then I definitely worked on my dissertation on pre-K access and funding, because it's very, very important and fundamental to the children and society as a whole that we have educated citizens in society, number one. Number two, I finished my dissertation, and I'm working in government, and I meet Azalea as a coworker, and then she met Ilona, who she then introduced to me. And the discussion came up around literacy at that point, and that's how we met, like crash course. I think everyone can tell their pre-stories, though.
Sure. So what is, and this is a question that I'll start with Alona and Azalea. What is it that the program you put together does that other programs don't do?
So I'll just say something briefly, and then you can speak to the foundation. The foundation had already been started by Azalea, and you can speak to that. Okay. And it was about housing and teacher housing. And we developed this three-prong idea that, number one, this country really needs, and starting with cities and states and then country, really needs a more informed teacher base. Like, we need more streamlined. Not that every school needs the same thing, heaven forbid, that's not true, but the basic scientific foundation for teaching reading. And so teachers need to be educated in that. And then we also decided that in order for teachers to survive, and once we have teacher training, for example, as part of our program, and once these teachers are trained, they need to be able to live in the communities where they teach. And especially in the Bay Area, but also other places, that's very difficult. It's not affordable on a teacher's salary.
So why is that important, living in the community in which you teach?
Wow.
You know, you would think a teacher isn't teaching because that teacher enjoys working with kids.
Yeah, and to connect with the kids that you work with, and these kids need to be seen and feel safe, and there's so many, reasons. But also, on a practical level, the commute is exhausting. We already have, teachers have long hours. We have now computers. We have to enter in Power School. So not only are we doing lesson plans, we get between probably, I don't know if other teachers are like me, 20 emails a night about, parents and administrators. And so it's a big job, and grading papers and so on and so forth. So commuting, doing, all our teachers are living in Santa Cruz, commuting up here, or living in, I'm from Los Angeles, so what are all the cities up by Sacramento?
You're not commuting from Los Angeles.
No, but I still don't know the cities here that well. So I think there are a lot of, reasons they need to be nearby.
Sure. Alona just said, Azalea, that you started the foundation.
Yeah.
Talk about how you started it, what the foundation does.
Sure. Well, I was teaching high school in San Francisco back in 2012. And I had the pleasure to go back to the high school in which I graduated from. And I actually got a chance to work alongside my teacher who actually taught me. So when going back, being a young teacher, I noticed that parents weren't really greeting me in the way in which I wanted them to greet me. I also noticed that the kids weren't they were open to me, but not in the way I wanted them to be open to me.
So how did you want the parents to greet you?
Well, first and foremost, as a professional, and to understand that I'm here to demonstrate a skill set and to teach their kids. So they looked at me as being another young person. So already I was dealing with credibility issues to see if I could try to break it up.
It's like, what do you know? You're too young to know anything?
They often thought I was one of the high schoolers, one of the high schoolers as well. And, the boys would be inappropriate, the girls would ask about hair advice, stuff like that. And so I didn't really feel like I was being of service as much. I will say that, admittedly. However.
But you were they saw you on their level, which means
that we can relate to some extent. To some extent. However, I still was professional. But in doing so, and I kept trying to do that work, and as I was getting more into it, because I was a para, I was going to take my CBES and become get my CBES and be done with that and become a real credentialed teacher. But something stopped me, and what stopped me is when I saw my teacher who had taught me, and she was 62, not retired yet, but 62 years old, and she was sitting in the hallway, just sitting there crying, like bawling. And as I sat there, and I talked to her, and I was like, "Are you okay? Like, everything okay?" And she told me she's getting evicted from her place. Now hear me. This has been a credentialed teacher, a career teacher, working at the age of 62, and she had nowhere to go, had no children, and all she's ever known was teaching. Yet for some reason, she was financially unstable and on the brink of being evicted from her place. I knew this was problematic for me, and I wanted to do something immediately.
So you're saying teachers aren't paid enough?
Well, that's a known fact. They're not paid enough. They're absolutely not paid enough because there's, they're paying to unions, and it's just the teaching stipend or teaching salary has not caught up to the market. It just hasn't for many reasons.
But this woman, presumably she was teaching you 15 years ago.
Yes.
Before. So she had been in the system for 15 years.
Correct.
At least. And she wasn't, the raises, one assumed she was getting some raises, but they weren't keeping up.
Certainly, and I can't pretend to understand what her financial background was. If there's, I don't know that, but all I heard is that she didn't earn enough to be able to, this is San Francisco, to be able to live on her own. Now, granted, you think about rent control, but she wasn't in a rent control unit. And of course, this was problematic to me because this had been a teacher who taught me, and I'm thinking she's like made it. And remember, this is a profession I want to enter. So when I seen that, that she was discontent with what was going on and clearly was not in a good state of mind, I was charged that very moment. I said, wait a minute, teachers are having an issue with housing. And this was back in 2012. So it wasn't a matter of contemporary policy at that point. It still was a moot point. We wasn't a big teacher housing burst type of thing. Like, we need teacher housing. And so I charged myself. I said, this is my calling. I want to help teachers with affordable housing. So I did just that. And I said if I was going to do this, I want to make sure I do it right. So I ran to an attorney, I drafted the bylaws, I got some teachers together, and we started a teacher organization dedicated to affordable housing for teachers. It was my prized possession. I was super excited about it. I went to the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School District, Dennis Kelly, who's no longer there anymore, and I asked him to endorse me. And he said to me,
endorse you for what?
To support me with this initiative, this organization to help teachers with housing. Now, granted, teachers' unions are focused on salaries. They don't care about housing, they focus on salaries. So it's about, give me more pay. It wouldn't be for us to do that. We're simply about, this is going to be dedicated to housing. He told me, go get a success and then come back to me. Now, you can imagine at 26 years old, I'm sort of shocked about what he's saying to me.
Go get a success. What, go get some teachers into affordable housing and then come back?
And then come back for an endorsement. So, I was like, wow, that was a slap in the face.
It's like, prove it to me first.
Correct. Now, mind you, this is all new to me. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to do it myself. And so I mobilized teachers. I went out there and really hit the ground running and tried to get teachers united and said, we need affordable housing.
Did you go to any of the unions?
Well, I went to only San Francisco because I was only focused in San Francisco at this time.
The union?
The union, correct.
Did
they did not endorse me. So I went to the teachers. We mobilized the teachers in San Francisco. And then I realized, I said, let's start getting teachers. We can do this on our own. We built programs where we help teachers find landlords who are willing to rent to them below the market rate.
So when you say endorse you, you don't mean like for a political office.
No,
you just
support.
mean support you.
Support.
Now, did that support, were you thinking of financial support or just
the name
have organizational support?
The organization, any type of support, just to be able to say, you know what, the union is going to stand by teachers in housing. Remember, these were grassroots organizations. This was a grassroots organization. This was coming from the teachers saying, hey, we need your help. And he decided not to do that. So I did it myself. I started my organization, and we started mobilizing. And we first started off with programs. We're like, okay, let's find any landlord who's willing to rent to a teacher below the market rate. And guess what would happen? We'll get a teacher, but we had no landlords. We couldn't find a landlord. Then we'll find a landlord, but we can't find no teachers. And remember, we're just a volunteer staff at this point. My husband and my ex-husband had donated $75,000 to our organization.
Goodness.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Oh, yeah. He was, yeah, that's another story. But so he's very gracious. So we had the money to start the organization off. But we realized it just simply wasn't sustainable. And I had other, I really wanted to do this and do it right. And I said, we need something that's going to be sustainable, scalable. And I said, you know what, we need this whole program and service thing is not working. Let me just back up one quick step. We actually, before they started doing brick and mortar housing, we had worked with Thompson Dorfman, their developer in Mill Valley. I live in Marin County. And we were going to work with them with teacher housing. They built housing in Santa Clara Unified School District. That was back in 2002 when they built the teacher housing for 40 units. And that was their nonprofit arm to help teachers with housing. Beautiful complex. Santa Clara did it first, Unified School District. 40 units. Now, granted, I'm super on champion. Now they're so popular now. They're doing more teacher housing everywhere. But this is back in 2012. And it was beautiful, but it was only 40 units. And I said to myself, I said, all this money just being important. This is my only thing I have to say about brick and mortar housing. No one asked teachers if they wanted to live in teacher housing, because they often think when they get off the job, they want to be off the job and not still be on the job. Now, granted, the young people will be into it, but maybe not the people who've been seasoned, who like, okay, I want to sort of get away from this type of thing. So I'm not knocking it. I think anything that's going to help teachers are great.
So So, how did you get from teacher housing to teaching students?
Well, I was teaching students first, and then I was doing to teacher housing. So I remember I started off as a para. I was going to be a teacher, and I realized there was a need for me I was going to be of service a different
How
way.
did you change that focus back to
Well,
literacy?
When I met Ilona, and I'm going to tell you, let me finish, let me just get this out real quick. So we started mobilizing our organization, and I said we want to shift to policy, because policy is overarching, it's sustainable, and it's going to be overarching for everyone. It's more sustainable. So we got rid of all programs and services. Now our charge for UA, or for UL, is to be teachers a basic allowance for housing, like the military. So the policy framework is already there. If you can give people, soldiers, my ex-husband was in the military, we got $3,400 because we live in Marin County. And that was independent of his salary. That was from the government because of his service. So the moment he stopped serving, we lose our stipend. And I said, what a beautiful way to start. Maybe we should take that same framework and give it to teachers, public education. And I asked military wives, I said, so you willing to, why did you come to the military? Many said they wanted to come because they wanted to be a patriot. But most, and more than that, said that they actually came because they wanted the stability of housing and education benefits. And I said, wait, let me get this logic. So you'd rather go on the front line, possibly risk dying or losing a limb for housing? And they said, yes. And I said, we have long lines for people to go to the military, but not many for public education.
Sure. Now, because in the interest of time, I'd like to see how you all connected in terms of literacy. And we haven't heard from you for a while, Carla. Can you still hear us?
Well, yes. So again, as I mentioned before, my passion is pre-K access, and literacy rolled into that. Teaching teachers, having something to teach those children is aligned with it as well. So that's the connection. I'm personally not the literacy expert. That is Ilona. I'm on the pre-K access, setting up your classroom. And I think what we all bring to the table is a little something different that's going to help impact literacy in housing. So because what we're trying to do is a pilot program working with early age children, so rising kindergartners. And once that pilot program takes off and we have some data, because we're going to do pre and post testing, we will be able to replicate that in other schools and other cities. So this is not a one-time deal. We're tackling this from the bottom up and top down. So we also, because of Azalea's policy knowledge, we plan to attack from the Washington angle too, because all of these issues are connected, and just like we are connected. And if we take care of them, then we won't have any issues on the back end. The more you invest in early education, and we know this, the data shows, the less we have to invest in other, crime, early pregnancy, et cetera. So all of these three components match together, and we all offer a different strength. We bring a different strength to the table that's going to tackle these issues.
Sure.
That's how we implement this.
Thanks. Ilona, talk about the teaching itself, because you work directly with young kids. And what are you doing that the public schools aren't doing? Assuming they're not doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And in fairness, I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there doing what I'm doing and trying to make a difference, and absolutely. And I'll start with saying East Palo Alto, just from what Carla said and what brought the three of us together, East Palo Alto is really the center of all of our hearts in a way, for different reasons, but also we just really care. And
the literacy rates and student performance in East Palo Alto is almost at the bottom of the list for California.
Absolutely.
Students in schools.
Absolutely, and it's heartbreaking, and we're losing more and more of these kids all the time. And East Palo Alto is very interesting because so many people have come into East Palo Alto, and when I first started working here, I thought, oh, there's no money, and that's what the problem is. But there are millions of dollars are being invested in the city in education. And so it begs the question, what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? And so this program says, first of all, we need to start at the beginning, because right now I'm working with middle schoolers, and this summer I did a program in East Palo Alto with the support of Azalea and Carla. We did it together, working with kids who were all reading. It was 6th, 7th, 8th graders reading at or below a 3rd grade level, and 2 of the kids were reading below the 1st percentile, which is not reading and not writing. So,
Well, what were they doing in school?
well,
And they came to school every day?
they came to school every day. And that's a whole nother discussion that is not, part of this. But I will say that these kids really need help. And so the first thing is, instead of addressing it at a middle school level, which I believe several organizations have done, they've come in and they've tried to remediate, which is very difficult because there are behavior problems. And so in 8 hours of a day, maybe an hour's worth of work gets done. The issues are beyond the scope of this discussion. So the first thing is, instead of remediating, as we're remediating these kids, we keep sending more kids up with the same issues. So let's start down here. We have the Head Start, we have the early access, the pre-K, and then our program comes in and does 1st grade. We do a rising kindergartner, so the summer before 1st grade, the summer after 1st grade, and the summer after 2nd grade, and do an intensive 6-week program with these kids, doing all the specific interventions, strengthening the actual processing, and building vocabulary, building language skills, following these kids after we set them loose after 3rd grade and tracking them compared to their peers who did not have this very specific reading instruction.
So how long has this program been running?
Since the summer.
This past summer?
past
Yes,
summer.
and
Yeah.
we're still looking for more. We're working right now with a couple of organizations, public schools, who are looking to create a group of kids for us to do a pilot program.
How many students have you worked with thus far?
Well,
Well, altogether, probably around 50. The summer program was started out with 15 kids. That's the other thing, is, then kids drop out, kids move. So there's a lot of movement and moving with families and leaving. And there are a lot of cultural and social issues. So that's part of
How many students successfully finished the program?
the program's not finished. So I'm
still
still
going.
with those kids.
They're still going on.
Right,
And what
right.
type of progress have you seen, or have you seen any progress?
Yeah, we've seen great progress. I mean, we've also, to be very, up front, seen a lot of difficulties that we realized, which I think other people who've come into the city and tried to do this have also experienced. When you're working with 15 kids who are reading kind of at different levels, or you have one who might display symptoms of dyslexia, one hyperlexia, one has, other processing
What's
issues.
hyperlexia?
The ability to read words, and usually at a very high level, but not being able to comprehend even at a very low, at a very low level. So perhaps reading to a 10th, 12th grade passage, but not being able to answer questions on a 2nd grade passage. So not understanding what you're reading. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned millions of dollars, lots and lots of money going into the cities for education. If these are the results, I once had a professor that said, all you need to do is throw enough money and that solves the problem. And that's definitely not so.
It's definitely not so.
But where is the money going? Is that because of the way the money's being used? Is it that people are using it to line their pockets?
So my answer is not a scientifically, how should I say, scientifically arrived at conclusion.
Answer that question.
Do you want to say something to that, Carla?
And I have to apologize that we have
can't
this noise.
say where the money goes because we don't track the money. So
Yeah.
that, to be fair, that we don't know, and we always like to assume everyone has the best intentions and is doing what they know is best. However, again, all we're doing is we're looking at data and then trying to go from there. We can't speak to what's happening with other people's money. We can't.
Well, looking at the data, You said you're looking at the data. What data are you looking at, and what does the data show?
Well, I think we look at a combination of data. You look at U.S. Census data, you look at school dashboards. We know the big lift is in San Mateo County. They have some data that they've provided. I think, Ilona, you know the numbers too. And that's how we see where schools and children are performing in this area. And then, of course, the U.S. Census can tell you across the nation. That's what we use. And is there anything that I missed, Ilona, as
Well,
far as
I was going
data?
I just wanted to be sure that we kept separate and clear the money issues, which one is specifically we had been talking about the city of East Palo Alto and foundations and grants and monies, and I don't want to say names, so certain schools bringing certain huge amounts of money in, which is not really helping. And then there's the issue of public funding. Like if you look at, we know the numbers are something like $10,000 per student in the United States in public school. And
That's how much money is spent per year per student?
Yes,
$10,000 per student?
Yes, in this particular study recently that I read, and $70,000 on an inmate in prison. So that's a separate set of numbers. So yes, we need money, we do need funding, but to your point, it's not the funding in and of itself. It's really the quality of education being delivered. It's also home support. It's also administrative alignment.
So let's say right now, give me a starting point of what needs to be done to get everything on the right track, presumably where students can read at grade level and stay on grade level and continue on through the public schools,
I would say
reading and comprehending what it is that they're reading.
Continue the Head Start programs, all of the helping families understand about literacy, have a rich home environment where language is part of it, where books are part of the environment, healthy, habits.
Those are all the ideals.
And then the next step is, in this country, have some kind of agreement, some kind of a consensus, collaboration on, we may not know exactly every single detail of reading or the reading brain, but we do know these things. And instead of fighting one another and saying, no, my program is the best, or no, my program is the best, or I want to prove this or get this grant from this university, and so we can't kill this program that we know doesn't work. Have everyone come aboard and say, this is the minimum requirement for a teacher education. And literacy, this is a reading society now. And so that is the minimum that we have to deliver to every child. And then have that early childhood instruction, grades 1 through 3, be delivered. And at third grade, if we're not reading, we know that that's kind of the magic grade. We make sure that those kids are remediated then, and not in high school or middle school or going to prison or doing whatever all the alternatives are.
Carla, did you hear all of that?
I did.
And do you have any? Yes.
I think to piggyback on what Ilona said is we need collaboration and we need uniformity. We know there's different teaching styles and different methods and different initiatives all the time. I mean, I teach teachers research, and they mention all the time that there's always a new initiative to get a new principal or superintendent, or the board moves on something, and things change constantly. So there hasn't been a lot of consistency in new curriculum initiatives. So I think what the main thing is from our side is to test this. That's our number one thing. Get data. We already have science and literature to prove that using a three-prong approach works. Now we want to apply it in the cities because it hasn't been applied. Test it, and then that's where we move from there.
So do you know?
Go ahead.
About 2 or 3 years ago, we had something called Common Core. And you talked about the uniformity in terms of teaching methods and systems. And the Common Core was something that was statewide.
Yeah, Common Core is how the teachers are teaching concepts to students. It's not how teachers are being taught to teach literacy. There's a difference.
Azalia, comments?
Not on that.
Alona?
Yeah, exactly. Common Core is not a literacy methodology. It's not a teaching methodology.
Well, as I find out, as I recently heard, even that's hitting the dust.
Yes,
That's what I know.
yes, yes.
It's changing.
So, you know, it's like the new math.
Yeah, it's
That didn't seem to work, and it's like we're
Yes.
coming up with all of these approaches,
Yes.
and nothing is really making incremental differences in student performances.
And that's the problem. You can't expect kids to get it when adults can't even get it.
well,
the-
we're
I
in
mean,
a very, very sorry state when the teachers don't get it enough.
And I do want to speak, because speaking from teachers, and with all due respect to teachers, there's a curriculum that they have to teach. And if the curriculum doesn't work, teachers are just doing what, you know, it's not all the blame on teachers, but there's an administrative component. And like you said, the Common Core curriculum was there, and it's not even proven to be actually work, but their job is to implement that and to make sure here's what we're teaching, this is it, it's rigid.
Whether or not they're behind it.
And this is what it
Yeah.
is. This is what we've been told to teach you. We can't deviate from that, even if we know things that might be
So
better.
do you know, it's very interesting, there were some suggestions, proposals that if teachers weren't teaching, then they would be held accountable and their salaries would be deducted because they're not doing the job that they should be doing. And of course, you're saying it's not all the fault of the teachers.
No,
they're not
no.
taught how to teach. At
Well,
least reading and
well,
literacy,
there
and
are
that's sad.
And there are other reasons that scores would be. You have 30 kids in a classroom, all at different levels. That's also
So
not the
you
answer.
said too that that's
Yeah.
even something happening in charter schools.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, yes.
Well, it almost
Absolutely.
all sounds hopeless, that we're not going to turn things around the way we need to turn them around overnight.
Well, not overnight,
Well-
but we will.
Well, I think that if you first, well, let's be clear. I can speak for myself, Ilona, Carla. We don't have anything vested in public education. We care about it. So our lens is completely different because we're not administrators. We're teaching, but Carla's teaching at the university level. Ilona's teaching at private level, but the interest is still there. So that's why it's so important to get this off the ground, this pilot program. Because remember, we're not just going in here arbitrarily just doing random stuff. We're going to test again, and then test again.
So when do you think you'll have some results from your program?
The end of this year.
The end of this
Yeah,
year?
because we're going to start another summer program.
Okay,
in
so I
June.
can have you back on the program.
You absolutely can.
Carla
Great.
believes in the data, and so you'll be giving us data.
And just to be clear, the data is not from us. It's an independent person who's going to be administering it before and after. That's how you build credibility, and we really want it's going to be independent person conducting that assessment.
Okay, we'll be following you.
Yeah,
Did you hear that, Carla?
Thank you.
We'll have you back. Maybe we'll have better sound when we have you back, if you're on the phone or if you
maybe
can
I'll
be here.
in person.
Yes, yes. So in the meantime, I think we're at the end of our time, and I'd
you.
like to thank you,
Thank you.
the three of you,
you.
for being
Thank you.
here, and you, Carla. And I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Carla.